Welcome to the next of our online lectures for U.S. History 1. Today we are going to be talking about the crisis of national expansion in the 1840s and 1850s. As always, there are some key terms that you should be able to keep track of as you are watching this video, and also one question that you should be able to answer. How did victory in the Mexican War heighten tensions between North and South? That said, let's get to it. Earlier this semester, we talked about a concept called American exceptionalism. It's an idea that argues that the United States is different from other nations. Some, like John Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, declared that his New World society was like, quote, a city on a hill. In other words, the eyes of the whole world were on what was happening here in America. More than 200 years later, another John, this time John O'Sullivan, made a similar statement about American exceptionalism. O'Sullivan was a newspaper writer in New York City, and in 1845 he argued in no uncertain terms what the destiny of this country would be. As O'Sullivan wrote, quote, "Away, away with all these cobweb tissues of rights of discovery, exploration, settlement, contiguity, etc. The American claim is by right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federative self-government entrusted to us. It is a right such as that of the tree to the space of air and earth suitable for the full expansion of its principle and destiny of growth." End quote. So what is O'Sullivan saying here? Well, what he's really saying is North America is ours for the taking, and neither Indians nor other European nations can stop us. Why? Because God gave us this land. It is our manifest destiny to dominate this continent. How things have changed. Almost 40 years earlier, the nation debated whether or not the government had the right to buy the Louisiana Purchase from France. Many felt the purchase was unconstitutional. Others thought it was a poor bargain. Now, however, expansion is considered to be our American manifest destiny. It will also, however, lead the nation to civil war. If we're going to understand manifest destiny, especially in the 1840s, we need to talk about the 11th President of the United States. That man is a man named James K. Polk, and he was elected in 1844. He campaigned primarily on a platform that promised American expansion. Expansion, he argued, would mean economic growth. The nation was mired in an economic depression at this time, so the message of growth carried a lot of weight with voters. Of course, previous expansion had led to tensions between North and South. All one had to do was think of Missouri and its troublesome entry into the Union in 1820. So Polk had to tread very carefully over this issue of expansion, out of a fear that it could exacerbate sectional tensions between North and South. And so to do this, what Polk decided to do was he needed to offer both North and South something in the deal. So the key was to expand territories both to the north and to the south. That way there would be new lands for slavery and new lands without slavery. The northern territory slated for expansion was Oregon, while the southern territory was Texas. In 1844, the Oregon Territory encompassed not just the current state of Oregon, but also Washington, Idaho, and British Columbia in Canada. The northern boundary line was a line measured at 54 degrees 40 minutes. It was always assumed that the two sides would eventually compromise over the border by dividing it in half. But then Polk was elected, and he began to talk about seizing all of Oregon for the United States. Many Americans, especially those living in the North, agreed, and the phrase 54-40 or fight swept the nation. In other words, the United States wanted all of Oregon, and it was willing to go to war with Great Britain to gain that territory. But just as tensions reached a boiling point, Polk compromised. He agreed to divide the territory in half. Canada would get the northern half, and the U.S. would get the southern half. Northerners were outraged at what they saw as a betrayal. They had been promised all of Oregon, and now they felt as if Polk had stabbed them in the back. The second part of Polk's plan was to take over Texas. Texas had been Mexican territory until 1835, when it won its independence. The territory had largely been settled by Americans from the southern states, who brought their slaves with them when they immigrated. In 1835, Mexico attempted to assert greater control over this territory, and it tried to outlaw slavery. This was the last straw, and Texas declared independence and was victorious after a short war. Now, most Texans really didn't want independence. They assumed that they would quickly be annexed or taken over by the United States. In fact, that's what they wanted. 10 years later, they got their wish when President Polk invited Texas into the Union. Now, of course, Polk knew that annexing Texas could lead to war with Mexico. And he was right. Mexico refused to recognize the American takeover of Texas. Moreover, they were incensed when the U.S. insisted that the southern border of Texas was the Rio Grande River. Instead, Mexico argued that the border should be further north along the Nueces River. Now, history backs up Mexico. Traditionally, the Nueces had been the southern border of Texas. But that didn't matter to the United States, however. Polk promptly ordered U.S. troops to move south across the Nueces, where they were attacked by a Mexican force. Polk used this as an excuse to declare war on Mexico. In his war message to Congress, he said, quote, "Mexico has invaded our territory and shed American blood on American soil. War, notwithstanding all our efforts to avoid it, exists by act of Mexico herself." End quote. Now, this war began after Mexican troops attacked American troops defending what they believed to be the border of Texas. Now, it quickly becomes clear, however, that Texas really isn't the cause of this war. The United States is doing more than just defending Texas. Instead, we are looking to add more Mexican territory to the United States. That becomes clear after an American army will invade California and, later, New Mexico, separating these two territories from Mexico. In 1847, a U.S. Army actually will capture the Mexican capital of Mexico City itself, forcing Mexico to ask for peace. The peace treaty, known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, was officially signed in 1848. Now, while some Americans called for a takeover of all of Mexico, the United States really had to settle for less. First, the treaty confirmed U.S. control of Texas. But Texas was only the beginning. The United States also took California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. This was half of Mexican territory at this time. The United States took half of Mexico. In exchange, the U.S. will pay Mexico $15 million in compensation. The American philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson will echo those thoughts, but he's also going to add a warning. Quote, "The United States will conquer Mexico, but it will be as the man who swallows arsenic, which brings him down in turn. Mexico will poison us." End quote. He's right. In 1846, when it was clear that the United States was going to win the war with Mexico, a young congressman from Pennsylvania named David Wilmot will propose, quote, "that as an express and fundamental condition of the acquisition of any territory from the Republic of Mexico, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any part of the said territory." End quote. This idea, known as Wilmot's Proviso, is essentially saying that should the United States take territory from Mexico as a result of this war, that territory must be free territory. Wilmot's Proviso will be like a bomb going off in the U.S. Capitol. When Congress votes on Wilmot's Proviso, the split will be along sectional lines rather than along party lines. In other words, all Northern representatives will support this proviso, while all Southerners will vote no. Ultimately, the proviso will fail in the Senate, where there is an equal number of free and slave states. Nevertheless, it's pretty obvious that this is going to cause future problems. The period from 1844 to 1848 is a period of incredible territorial expansion. Not only will the U.S. add half of Oregon to our territory, but it'll also add all of Texas, as well as New Mexico, California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, etc. That should have been on this slide. I forgot to put it up there. But as Wilmot's proviso indicates, this territorial expansion will also heighten tensions between North and South, and between free states and slave states.